Hey there, we're looking at carbohydrates now. And as a runner, as a cyclist, carbohydrates were a large part of my life for a very long time. I hope that you don't misunderstand some of the things that I'm going to say. Carbohydrates have a huge quality. They do a lot of good things. We need some of the good stuff from carbohydrates. And I'm going to go into length of that more, especially as we progress through these modules. But we want to start with some just fundamental truths about what carbohydrates are. Number one, they are sugars, they are starches, and they are fiber. And so we can kind of commonly connect to this because this does make up a larger part of the conventional standard American diet. And when you think about sugars, man, you can rock on with candy, ice cream, soda, but did you know that sugars are also located in dairy? They're located in fruit. They're located in bread. They're located in most of the processed foods that we eat. They are the bulk of any box of cereal that we force down our kids' mouths. So it's pretty abundant. Now, we have to understand there's some other things to carbohydrates like fiber. We'll get into that here in a minute, that are good and very much needed. But for the most part, we have to understand that we are exposed to carbohydrates far more than we're exposed to anything else. And that has largely to do with that traditional food pyramid. I've enclosed a picture below so you can kind of view that. But don't be fooled. I'm not a big fan of the pyramid as it stands. So again, fruits, vegetables, and dairy are one of the largest holders of carbohydrates, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting good or bad carbohydrates because you eat fruits or vegetables or dairy. It just means that you're definitely getting some type of carbohydrate, meaning that you're getting glucose. Glucose is just a form of sugar, and so we kind of have to break that down just a little bit. Now, from there, glucose goes into our system and it's converted into glycogen. Glycogen is stored in our liver, it's stored in our muscles, and it's ready to be used for energy. The unique thing here is with blood carrying glycogen around, if it doesn't quite make it to the liver, like it never even got turned into glycogen, then it's glucose. And then if it's in the blood system, it's blood glucose. And if it's blood glucose, then it's blood sugar. And that term typically kind of hinges off that other thing called hyperglycemia, and that is high blood sugar. And so if it never makes it to the liver and it goes out into circulation, well, that could be good because that means your body's trying to use it instead of stuffing it into a cell. But the other side of that is if it's stuffed into the liver and it doesn't get stuffed into storage um, in a way that it can be used pretty rapidly, then it's going to be stuffed into storage fat. And that's just kind of the bad news about carbohydrates is we know that's where it'll eventually end up. Well, fat is not necessarily a bad thing. Remember, it's the single most concentrated form of energy. The question here is what happens if you didn't have carbohydrates funding that storage fat? Just a thought. You kind of proceed with that and let me know. So it's also the only non-essential macronutrient out there, and by that I'm just simply stating that we can manufacture with our body the energy needed to do whatever it is we need to do activity wise, including run our brain, without carbohydrates. In fact, if you consider this back to kind of our ancestor roots, and I'm not going to quite go with this whole paleo thing yet, we'll let you know when we get there. But when you think about how people ate and consumed meats as their majority of what they consumed, and then they may have had apples or they may have had some fruit or some vegetables seasonally, but the majority of their nutrition came from animal fats and meats. also from bones and marrow. So that kind of comes in and says, hey, look, our bodies were kind of started that way. It doesn't have to be a carbohydrate in there. Just wanted to throw that in. You think about that and let me know. Next is this, though, fiber. And honestly, when I tell you, and I've said this in earlier videos, if you know me at all, I kind of subscribe to more of a low carbohydrate, which I'm sure you're picking that up by watching this video here. But here's the carbs that I do really go after, and I go after fiber. Fiber is necessary, but it has some really good value to it, because if you eat a lot of fiber, you can increase your high density lipoproteins, your HDLs, your good cholesterols, and you can lower your bad cholesterol. So that's a fantastic thing. Real quick, just so you know, HDLs should be right around 160 on your blood panels. LDLs should be right around 40 or less. And so you want to maximize and optimize those. And the way you do that is eating soluble fiber. At least that's one of the ways you can do that. Endogenously. So digestive tract is where soluble fiber kind of tends to ferment. It's going to go into your gut, and that's where it's going to ferment. But then there's this other insoluble fiber, and it doesn't ferment until it gets into your colon. Both very much a positive thing because of what they do. I would love to sit and talk only about the microbiome and the digestive tract and the colon. We just simply don't have time. Come have a seat in my office and we'll chat microbiome sometime. But it's a must for good gut health. And what's good gut health? That is your microbiome, but it's also thinking about the things that are going on with your gut. And to kind of keep this, on the up and up here, you probably know just by virtue of your mom telling you, eat this food, it's high in fiber, it'll help you go to the bathroom, right? And when you've consumed foods that are high in fiber, you go to the bathroom. And you know that when you consume foods that are fairly low in fiber, that don't have a great fiber nutritional density, and sometimes you don't go to the bathroom regularly. And that's something to consider about fiber specifically. It helps to manage body weight, but also type 1, type 2 diabetes. Fiber is a very different type of carbohydrate because it's not broken down and then excreted as glucose. It's broken down and used for digestion and colon health. And so we don't see it broken down the same way we would see a sugar or a starch. Recommendations are around 30 to 40 grams a day. I would say this, if you've had more than 40 grams a day, you've probably made several visits to the bathroom, right? So keeping that in check, very important. Some of our examples of fiber: oats, psyllium husk, which I love. I've just recently kind of found this as a addition to making some, and you're going to kind of judge me here, but that's okay, some breads that are low carb, but I'm using psyllium husk like crazy, and it is fantastic. Flax is another one, another big fiber source. Also some good fats in flax. Chia seeds, same thing, huge fiber source, huge good fat source. If chia seeds are not part of your diet, make that happen. They're incredible. Beans, another fiber source. Um, Brussels sprouts. I love Brussels sprouts, especially when you take those dudes, cut them in half, chop off the stem, and then send them through the oven at about 450 for 20 minutes with some garlic and Parmesan on there. They are money. Broccoli, another thing that has high fiber. Apples and prunes. I'm not a big prune guy, but if you are, awesome. Get you some prunes and get you some fiber. Are carbs good? Are they bad? Are they either? Well, listen, I want to tell you right now, I'm more of a fan of diversity in our diet. I think that carbs do have a place. I'm not completely anti-carb, but I do feel like that we kind of overdo it. One of the things that I want to kind of point out to you and give you some information on is something called the glycemic index. And this is basically a chart that says these foods will break down and cause this to happen to your blood glucose and basically saying how fast is your blood sugar raise. Well, and they've made a list, and bananas are on there and apples are on there and all these different things are on there. But what has to happen is we have to understand individually, what does that do to our blood glucose. I can have you know a banana and it doesn't really do that much to me, but I could eat a donut and it just wrecks me. And the interesting thing is they don't vary too differently on the glycemic index, but a banana has fiber and it has minerals and it has vitamins, and the donut has nothing. It's just empty sugar carbs. So maybe that's a lot of it. And maybe as we consider some of the carbohydrates that we're using, that we use better unprocessed carbohydrates. That's kind of the side of things where carbohydrates should be being villainized a little bit, because they're just so abundant and so overused and abused in our typical conventional American diet. The intake and the purpose dictates the answer, whether they're good or bad. I can tell you this, that I have absolutely no problem handing my son one of those sugar-coated donuts about a 30 to 40-minute window before I take him to a 5K and let him run, because I know that that stuff's going to get in his blood sugar. His blood sugar is going to go up, but he's going to start running and it's going to be used as energy. But I do have a problem handing him that same sugar donut and then sending him into his classroom at school at 8 a.m. on any morning of the week, because I know what it's going to do to him otherwise. His blood sugar is going to go up. His ability to concentrate is going to go down. His ability to function is going to go down. He's going to get this rebound insulin and all these different bad things that are going to come up. And it's just not a good situation for him. And I want you to consider, how many times have you had sugar and had this immediate kind of, ooh, I feel good, but then within an hour, you're crashing. Why? Because you're getting this big, heavy insulin response, and it's wiping out all that blood sugar trying to take it out and store it. Well, then you become hypoglycemic again. Another thing here is connected to long-term weight gain. And I gave you this study because what we have been able to do is another meta-analysis here. And when you read this, what you understand is that we can prove that long-term weight gain does occur from long-term carbohydrate use. And that has a lot to do with insulin. It has a lot to do with blood glucose. It has a lot to do with that thing called insulin resistance. And again, you're looking at the whole idea of type 2 diabetes and saying, how does that happen? Well, insulin gets released, and the more we do this blood glucose or blood sugar increase thing, the more commonly insulin has to come in, and the more of it has to be used, because there's a tolerance built up called resistance, insulin resistance, and the more has to come in, more has to come in, more has to come in, and eventually, you know what, the system just goes deaf, because it's no longer listening to the whole process of, well, blood glucose is just going to come in, we're not going to be able to store it. We have no room to stuff it into the cells anymore. And that's where the problem really sets in. If it can't go in the cells, it's going to go into storage fat. Guess what? That means weight gain. So we can connect it. The question is it something that we can control? Can you control your blood glucose? Can you control your carbohydrate intake? That's a challenge. Watch some of our supplemental videos. Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next video, known as protein.